PHP Slim 4 Authentication Lesson 10. Today we are going to set up database migrations, factories, and seeders. So to get started with, we need to install two new packages. This first one is going to be Rob Morgan /phinx, and then it's going to be the up arrow, and then version 0.11.5. After that, we're also going to install this Fasnatiello Faker package, and we're going to add those directly through Composer. Then we are going to simply do Composer and then install. Okay, so then once we have Composer installed, we need to run this vendor/bin/phinx and then init. This is going to create a new phinx YAML file. But we don't actually want to use this YAML file. We want to use our PHP. And so to get this set up, we're going to add our config, and then we're going to add this migrations.php. So migrations are like version control for your database. We'll be able to control the structure and the version of our database through PHP. After that, we want to add our paths, and these are for the scaffolds that phinx allows us or gives us. We're going to point our migrations to our database path. We're going to say migrations, and then we're going to do, spell path right, and then we're going to do the same thing for our seeds. We're going to point this to seeders. All right. After that, we're going to set up our database environment. Now there is going to be a little bit of code duplication here between this file and our database file. I don't like it, but I messed with it for quite a while, and it seems like the simplest way. So here's going to be our migration table. This is going to be phinx log. Our default database is going to be Slim, and this is actually not the database itself. This is going to point to this array. And then within this array, we need to add these settings. And so this is just going to be our database host, adapters MySQL, database, name, user, password, port, and char set. You can basically copy these from over here and then from the database.php file into here and then just change the keys. Now there is a very big caveat when doing this. And I'll actually let us run into it before we do it. So now whenever we run vendor bin/phinx, we'll get a list of commands. And what we can do is we can say list them, and you'll notice we have migrate, we have create, which is create a new migration. Okay, so first we're going to try to create a new migration. It will fail. Create make users table migration. Why to fail? Well, it failed because we don't have our database directory. So first we need to make our directory for database, which we had it in the last one. I must have not added it to version control, so you probably still have it. Then once we add database, we're going to add migrations, and then we're going to add new directory and call it factories. Within factories, we're going to have a new directory that is going to be support, and then within our database, we are going to add our seeders. So the seeds point to our seeders, the migrations point to our migrations. The factories will be the last thing we do today. Okay, so now, if we run this, it's still not going to work. Well, the reason is we don't want to mess with our YAML file. We actually can't use the YAML file, so we're going to delete it. That's a big caveat. So what we can do is we can actually point our configuration using this -c to /config/migrations.php. And we'll create our database migrations. Now notice I didn't say why we couldn't use it yet, and we'll get into that. So what we're going to do to start off with is we are going to go to our make users table migration. Now within our migration, we're going to add this code. We're going to say this table can be users. Then we're going to say table equals this table users. We're going to say table add column first name. First name is going to be a string, and the limit is going to be 1 to 8. Next, we're going to just copy this because this is a Fluent API. and add column, add column, add column, add timestamps, and then we're going to create our table. Now right here, we're going to change this to last name. We're going to change this to email. We're going to change this to password. We're going to add our semicolon, and voila, it should work. So what does a migration do? Well, first let's break it. What's going to happen if we try to run it? So now we want to just do phinx, and we just want to do this command, our migrate command. We get all of these red errors. So access denied for vagrant for homestead at 172.2801. Okay, so this is the first thing that's going on. In our migrations, in our config migrations, we need to actually do something really funky, and I'll explain it here in a second. So what's really funky is we have to require once our directory and then vendor autoload.php. Next we have to say app equals require once base path bootstrap/app.php. Okay. After that, we need to go back to bootstrap. We need to go back to public. And just for a little bit of protection, we're also going to add require once here and require once here. So what is going on? Why are we doing this? Well, check this out. We never hit our public/index.php. So the reason that we're getting this denied error, this big denied error, is because it's trying to use the wrong credentials. And the credentials it's trying to use are the defaults we add on env. It's not actually ever triggering our bootstrap load environment variables. This is where we load our .env variables. And because we never hit public/index.php, we never require our autoloader, and we never bootstrap our app. The phinx is a command line tool, and this is actually one of the reasons we made our kernel and our service providers separate, is because not everything is an HTTP request. So what we need to do is we just need to make sure we only require them once, and then in our config, we're just adding require once the autoload, and then we're also going to require once the app. But if they're already loaded, for example, if we're on a normal page, it won't require them. So if we ever do need our migrations on an HTTP route, we won't duplicately require them more than once. We won't bootstrap our app more than once. So that is the explanation for that. So now if we try it, what do we get? Well, still nada. Okay. Using password, yes, and then PDO adapter. So what's going on? Well, personally, on my setup, and again, you guys can be different depending on how you're connected to MySQL, I need to actually SSH into my virtual machine. So now if we try to run this, it'll work. And so what did this do? Well, if we go into MySQL and we go into use slim, the database, and we show the tables, and then we show columns from users, it will automatically add the database structure based on our migration. And so if we want to roll that back, we can do this. We can do roll back, and that will revert the previous migration. So what's it mean when we roll back or revert? Well, if we go back in now and we do use slim and we say, okay, show columns or show tables first, we no longer have our users table because we rolled back our migration. Another thing is that this is getting kind of annoying if you have to type all this out. So we're going to fix that real quick. Let's do this. We're going to touch phinx. Then we are going to simply add a little helper script right here. We're going to say this. We're going to say php vendor ben phinx. First parameter, the second parameter, the third parameter. And then we are going to say ls change mod to ./phinx, and we're going to change that to 755 or writable. And so now we can just do this. We can do phinx, and then we can do migrate, and it will automatically reference our configuration. And now if we want to do phinx roll back, phinx migrate, phinx create new example migration. All that stuff works now, and all we had to do is add this script. It's just saying if there is a parameter 1, if there is a parameter 2, if there is a parameter 3, add them here after we call this script, and then append the configuration file, which is our config/migrations.php. Okay, so then in database migrations, we do not need our example migration. That was just for purpose of example. But we do have our migrations now, and we do have our table. But we still don't have any dummy data, right? Like, we have our table itself, the structure is in place, but check this out. If we select blank from users, there's nothing there. How cool would it be if we could just populate our database with dummy data? So this is where seeders come in. So our seeders are meant to seed our database with dummy data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do seed create and then users table seeder, or user table seeder, just like that. Now we have a users table seeder. So we could do this, we could do table, insert, all of that, but that's honestly not a great setup. We could do that, but then we're messing with our database every time we want to just add dummy data. So we're going to actually set this up in a really cool way. We're going to define factories. And so what factories are going to do is they're going to allow us to add dummy data, to like factorize them, to create them and set faker data and only override the things we want to override. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a factory class. Now our factory class is going to look a little funky, but it'll get the job done. So we're going to say public static definition. Then we're going to say public function invoke. And it is going to accept a model and the number of models we want to create. After this, we're going to say load factory for model. And then we're going to return this factory make or create options, model count, and then static definitions model. Now I know this is looking really funky right now. I will explain it here in a sec. Public static definitions, yeah. And then we want to add this public function load factory for model. I'll actually copy and paste this since it's hard to follow anyways. And all this is going to do is it's going to get the app we're trying to create dummy data for, and then it's going to look for the same model name, the same like user, for example, and it's going to look for user factory. And it's going to look for the user factory file. And this is not going to be a class. We're going to dynamically load this when we call our factory. Next, we're going to say require once database path factories factory.php. So this will load the user factory. So if we go, for example, factory user class, and then we want to create 5 users with the dummy data of name, first name is Sam. So everybody's first name is Sam. But if we try to store this in the database right now, it would error out. We would have to add every single property for every single user. Well, instead of doing that, what we're going to set up is we're going to do something like this. We're going to say the factory definition for the user model is going to default to these attributes. So if we were to create a user using a factory, then we could override the first name, and then we could say, you know, hard-coded first name. And so it will take these attributes, and then it will automatically apply those to our factory. And so if we did 1, and then we did create, just like that, it will create one user where the first name is hard-coded first name, and then it will automatically populate these other table properties. So how do we finish making this? Well, notice we have a, here, let's get rid of all of that jazz. We have a factory maker create function, and then we have one final function, which was the one you just saw in the user factory. And that's our public static function define. We're going to say string model, and then a callable fake. That's just going to be the callback function that populates this model's definition with faker data. We can override specific data that is faked. We can override all of the data that is faked, but we don't have to. The dummy data will be there, and we have the option or opportunity to override it. Okay, so this next part is also a little bit funky, but it's so we can create multiple apps. So we want to be able to say user class 5 create. We want to create 5 user classes, and then just say, you know, whatever. Normally, you wouldn't be able to add the number of users you want to factorize. You wouldn't be able to create more than one user at a time using a factory. But using this funky setup, we are able to. So here's how it works. We're going to return a factory make or create class from our factory. So whenever we call our function, so again, factory equals new factory, and then we can do factory user class 1. That's what the invoke function does. It lets us call the instance as a callback function. This will allow us to set the model and the number of models we want to create, and then we can decide whether we want to create the user. Create is being the keyword, which will save or store or persist the dummy user to the database. The other option we have with Eloquent is we can make a user. When we make a user, we do not actually save the user to the database. When we create a user, it is or they are persisted to the database. So we have to set our model and then count the number of users we want to make, and then we have to still allow for the options to create or make a user with specifically overridden attributes that will override the dummy data. So here's how that's going to work. We're going to do public model, public count, public default attributes. And then we're going to say public function construct model count default attributes. This is actually a callback. This model equals model, this count equals count, and this default attributes equals default attributes. After that, we're going to say public static function options. We're going to say arguments, and then we're just going to return a new instance of our class passing in the arguments. So that just allows us to use the static function, factory make or create options, instead of having to do it up every time. We'll still return a new instance though. That's what the new static keyword does. After that, we're going to add 2 new methods. The first one is going to be create attributes. The attributes passed into these 2 methods are going to override the faker dummy data attributes. The next method is going to be make. And remember, it's very, very, very important, especially for testing, to remember that create persists to the database. Make does not save the model to the database. It is just stored in memory. Make just stores the dummy factory model in memory. Okay, so after that, we're going to do model equals this model. We're going to do default equals this default attributes. And then we're going to do created equals collect. And we actually have to add that global helper function, I believe. And we're going to say for creating equals 1. Creating has to be less than or equal to this count and creating plus plus. We're going to loop through the number of items we need to create, and because we're using a Laravel or Illuminate collection, we can just push in any created models. We will also have to force create it because the guarded attribute on a model. So you have fillable and you have guarded attributes. They both map to columns in the database. Fillable is allowed to be mass assigned. It's allowed to, those properties are allowed to be passed around everywhere. You cannot mass assign password or anything that's in this guarded array within a Eloquent model. So to get around this guarded array where it doesn't allow you to mass assign, but we kind of need to because we don't have the properties on a factory, we have to force create it. So in doing that, we do this. We can do default, and the default is going to be the user factory. So this is actually what default is. I probably didn't name that well enough, but it accepts an instance of faker, so we can generate faker data. And so what it's going to do is it's going to do faker/faker factory, and then we're going to create it. We're just passing it through. After that, we're going to override any of the faker data with the attributes passed in or hard-coded. Okay. Once we get done with the create, we need to actually return the created. That way we get a collection in case we want to use it. And let's remove that comment. After that, we will simply copy all of this down to make. And we'll change a few things, but not much. So all we're going to change is we're going to change the created to made. And then we're going to change this force create to make. Because we're not storing in the database, you don't have to force make. It never uses the database. It's not a security risk. It's just stored in memory. And then we'll return made. Also, let's do making equals 1. Making has to be less than or equal to this count. Making plus plus. All right. So that's a lot to follow so far, but we are almost there. And honestly, I don't know if this is one of those things where I'm kind of just trying to get it out there so everybody can use it. Hopefully you can learn something from it, but this was a weird workaround because Slim made it a little bit weird, almost difficult to set up factories. So it's a weird workaround, but hopefully it can still come in use to you guys. So the last thing we need to do is the second last thing we need to do is we need to add some global helper functions. So we're going to add collection, and within collection, we're going to say if no function exists for collection, we're going to say function collect, and we're actually going to make that collect. So these are going to be Laravel collections. They're really, really useful. They let you do, you guys will see them in action here soon enough. They're really awesome. And then we're going to say return new illuminate, and we'll do collection. By the way, phinx, our migration setup, that is actually a cake PHP thing. So that is why you'll see cake PHP within your imports or available imports. Okay, now we have that. Use collection, return new collection. All right, so that's our collect function. Next, we need to add a new factory function. This factory function is going to say if function exists, or if no factory function exists, the factory function is going to accept a string, which is the model class. User is the only model we currently have, and the number of those models we want to factory up, and it's going to be default to just 1. So we're going to say factory equals new factory. We do not have to import that because we're about to globally use that or load that through Composer Autoload. And then we have to say factory model count, just like that. Okay. Then finally, we can go to our composer.json, and within our composer.json, we are going to simply say class map, and then we're going to do database factories support, and then we can dump our autoload, composer dump autoload, clear that out, and go to our database seeders. And since we have registered our global function factory, we can do app user class, and then we can do create 10 users. We're going to create them and persist them to the database, and then we're going to override the name and say Johnny Jim Dean Joe, just like that. And then we're going to say users equals that, and we're going to do users, and then for each function, and this is the Laravel collections, users, we're going to do var dump user, and then we will die and dump created users. just to get it there. All right. Now finally, we can do phinx run seed run. Okay, and it looks like I just had a typo. So if we go back to factories, this is actually going to be definitions. So reference it correctly down here, did not reference it correctly in the factory class. After that, we're going to try to run phinx seed run. It's going to fail on us. The reason it's failing is because it's saying unknown column name. If we go back here, it's because we don't have a column name. If we go to MySQL real quick and we do use slim, show tables, show columns from users, we have first name and last name. So we're going to say first name. Now if we exit out of that and we run this again, it properly works. And so we can test that out by going back to MySQL, use slim, and then select blank from users. And we now have 10 dummy users that all have the same first name because we overrode the first name. Now, the final thing I really want to punt through is if we make, it will not be saved to the database. So if we do first name equals don't matter, won't be saved. Like, we'll still have users within PHP, they're just not saved to the database. And so what we'll do is we'll actually open up a new thing right here, and we'll do cd code /phinx / seed run, and then we will still get all of our user output, but our MySQL database did not get any more users. Same amount of users. Versus if we change this to create, does matter, they'll save. And then we go back here and we run that again. Now if we reload, we have 20 users. So that's the difference between create and make. So that's all I got today, guys. That is seeders, migrations, make, create, and adding dummy data. What's cool about this is, here, check this, and we'll get rid of that, is once we start adding relationships and doing really fancy things, we can actually do users each function, and then maybe we could do user, and then we'll do user, we'll do factory, and maybe team class, and then we could do 3, and we could do owner, create, and then maybe owner ID is the user ID. And so we can start creating factories based on nested values and looping through. And again, the reason we're able to do this each and chain these together is because we have Laravel collections in Illuminate. So I'll link to all this in the description, and make sure you guys have all the resources you need. Again, this is phinx. This is from Cake PHP, Illuminate, and the setup of factories. It's not the same implementation, but the final outcome of how factories look is from Laravel. And seeders, migrations, and factories are pretty synonymous for big-time PHP development these days. Especially for testing, you really do want factories. And migrations, it's just dangerous not to version your database. We version our code base, but we don't seem to do it as often in our database, and we're getting better about that. But one last thing, let's go to our API controller, and let's simply get all of our users. We're going to say users get, and we'll just do users, and maybe we'll just do user get, just like that. And of course, if we go and we open up right here, and we go to API/example, we will get all of the users we just created with our dummy data. If we want to pass that through to like a view template, so we'll go to our welcome controller, and we'll say users get, and we'll say users this time, users, and we'll do auth.home.blade.php. We can do for each users as user at end for each, and then we could add this here. And we can actually loop through all of our dummy users within our template. and that is going to be /welcome Sam. Acting as, it looks like we don't have this method anymore. So we reload that one more time. And there we go. We are looping through all of our users right there. So this really gets us set up to start testing, to make sure we're doing things right as we build out our authentication system, and to dynamically hide and show different resources, based on a given user's permissions and roles, to make sure that users can't have duplicate emails and that certain people can't just access pages that they don't have access to. And so creating these dummy factories this way and allowing us to override specific data is hugely, hugely helpful for building out our application. So that's all I got, guys. This is Zachary Warren with Clean Code Studio, Clean Code, Clean Life, Simplify. If you learned something, if you had a problem with something, if you just have an idea or just want to chat about code below, let me know, guys. I'm always up for talking. And so, yeah, that's all I got for today. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing, but I'm thinking maybe getting on to the front end next time and setting up maybe a Vue front end with Tailwind is what I'm thinking. But if you guys have any opinions on the front end, let me know, and I'll definitely take those into account. Thanks again, guys. See you next time. Simple.